What would you do if your HOA decided your land wasn't really yours anymore? If one day, out of nowhere, they declared that your property now belonged to the community and you had no say in it? The first sign of trouble wasn't a letter. It wasn't even the black SUV that crawled up my driveway like a predator sizing up its prey. It was the silence. An unnatural, heavy silence that made my skin prickle. The birds had stopped chirping. The leaves had stopped rustling. Even the wind held its breath, as if the world itself knew something was coming. Toby, my German shepherd, let out a low growl, his body tense beside me on the porch. I wiped the sweat off my forehead and set my wrench down on the hood of my truck. It was supposed to be just another day, fixing things, tending to the land, enjoying the peace I had worked so damn hard for. But as I watched the SUV door swing open, I knew that peace was over. The woman who stepped out didn't belong here. Crisp white business attire, sunglasses that hid her eyes, red-painted lips curled into a smirk. She wasn't just here to talk. She was here on a mission. The way she scanned my land, chin lifted slightly, told me she thought she already owned it. She walked toward me with the confidence of someone who had already decided they were in charge. I didn't move. Didn't speak. Just let Toby's steady growl do the talking for me. She finally stopped a few feet away, tilting her head slightly, sizing me up. Then, without a greeting or even a hint of hesitation, she said the words that changed everything. This land should belong to the community, and I'm here to make sure that happens. I blinked. Maybe I had misheard her. This land? My land? The place I had bought with my hard-earned money, the place I had built with my own two hands? My lips parted, but I couldn't even find the words at first. I let out a short, humorless laugh, wiping my hands on my jeans as I took a step forward. You're kidding, right? She didn't flinch. Didn't waver. If anything, her smirk deepened, like she was enjoying this. I assure you, I'm very serious. The Homeowners Association has reviewed the layout of the area, and we believe this property is better suited as a shared recreational space. A park, if you will. A place for the community to enjoy nature. I stared at her, trying to process the sheer insanity of what she was saying. There is no homeowners association here. Now she did something that made my blood run cold. She smiled wider. Like she had been waiting for me to say that. Oh, but there is, she said, clasping her hands together in front of her. It was recently formed to oversee community regulations and improvements. And as per our new guidelines, privately owned land that serves no active purpose can be reassigned for the greater good. Something sharp coiled in my chest, anger, slow burning, sinking into my bones. Lady, I don't know who you think you are, but this is my land. I bought it. I own it. And no made-up HOA is going to tell me otherwise. Her expression didn't change. If anything, she looked amused, like I was a child throwing a tantrum over something inevitable. You'll find that the legal documents say otherwise, she said smoothly, pulling a neatly folded paper from her bag and holding it out to me. The county has already approved the reassignment process. You'll receive an official notice within the week. In the meantime, we suggest you begin making arrangements. Of course, if you choose to resist, there will be consequences. Toby barked sharply at that last word, his hackles raised, teeth bared. My fingers curled into fists at my sides. This wasn't some pushy neighbor complaining about fences or noise. This was a takeover. A full-scale attempt to steal what was mine, dressed up as community service. I didn't take the paper. Didn't even look at it. Instead, I took a slow, deliberate step forward, closing the distance between us until I was just inside her personal space. For the first time, her smirk faltered. You listen to me, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I don't care what fancy paperwork you shove in my face. I don't care what lies you tell the county. This land is mine. And if you or anyone else tries to take it from me, you're going to regret it." A flicker of something crossed her face. Not fear exactly, but surprise, like she hadn't expected me to push back so quickly. But just as fast as it appeared, she recovered, stepping back with a sigh and adjusting her sunglasses. "Suit yourself," she said breezily, turning back toward her car. "But don't say I didn't warn you." I stood there, muscles coiled so tight I thought I might snap, watching as the SUV's tires kicked up a cloud of dust down the road. I exhaled slowly, turning to Toby, who was still on high alert. "This isn't over." And I was right. Because the next morning, the real nightmare began. The next morning, the first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the eerie stillness from yesterday, but something else, the absence of my usual routine. No birds chirping near the barn, no rustling of Toby trotting across the porch, no distant hum of my neighbor's tractor miles away. Everything felt off, but I didn't understand why until I stepped outside. A large red and white notice was pinned to my front door, flapping slightly in the morning breeze. The bold letters at the top read, "Official HOA Notice, Land Reassignment in Effect." I ripped it down and scanned the fine print, my stomach sinking with each word. According to this bullshit declaration, my property had been successfully reassigned as a designated community green space. The language was thick with legal jargon, but the meaning was clear. As far as the HOA was concerned, I no longer owned my own damn land. I had 30 days to vacate so development could begin. Toby growled as I clenched the paper in my fists. They were serious. They weren't just trying to intimidate me anymore, they were moving forward with stealing my home like it was already a done deal. I stormed back inside and grabbed my phone, my fingers shaking with rage as I dialed the county office. It rang too many times before someone finally picked up, their voice bored, uninterested, like they dealt with this kind of thing every day. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I gave them my address, told them about the notice, and demanded to know what the hell was going on. There was a pause, then the distant clicking of a keyboard. The silence stretched on long enough that my patience ran razor thin. Finally, the voice on the other end sighed, choosing their words too carefully. "Yes, sir, your property has officially been annexed into an HOA as of last month." I gripped the phone tighter. "That's impossible. I never signed anything. There is no HOA here." The clerk hesitated again, then muttered something about loopholes in zoning laws, about how petitions could be approved if they weren't contested within a certain timeframe. My gut twisted. This had been planned. They had quietly filed the paperwork, waited out the mandatory review period, and now they were hitting me with an eviction notice before I had the chance to fight back. But the final blow came when I asked who had filed the petition. There was a brief pause before the answer came. One name. Karen. My blood boiled so hot I could barely see straight. She hadn't just scammed me, she had filed a fake community petition claiming that residents had voted in favor of turning my land into a public park. But there were no residents. My nearest neighbor lived miles away. There was no community to vote on anything. I hung up without another word and grabbed my keys, shoving the crumpled notice into my jacket pocket. If they thought I was going to take this lying down, they had another thing coming. I was halfway to the county office when my phone rang again. I almost ignored it until I saw the name flashing across the screen. Walter Grayson, County Commissioner. I answered, my voice cold. "Tell me you're fixing this." Grayson sighed. "Jack, I just got off the phone with legal. This isn't a simple case. The HOA got county approval, which means they're technically operating within the law." I slammed my hand against the steering wheel. Operating within the law? She forged a damn petition. How the hell does that count as legal? Another sigh. Look, I know this stinks. But reversing it is like pulling teeth. You're going to need a lawyer, and even then, it's an uphill battle. These HOAs, once they get their claws into something, they don't let go easy. I exhaled sharply, trying to keep my temper in check. So what am I supposed to do? Pack up my life and hand it over to a woman who waltzed onto my land yesterday like she already owned it? Grayson was silent for a moment before he finally said, "Not if you fight back hard enough." I didn't wait for more. I knew what I had to do. But before I could even start looking for a lawyer, a black SUV pulled into my driveway. I killed the engine and stepped out just as Karen emerged, flanked by 3 men in cheap security uniforms. They weren't cops, but they carried themselves like they wanted to be. One of them was holding a clipboard, scanning my land like he was already making plans for what to do with it once I was gone. Karen crossed her arms and smiled, acting like she was making a casual house call. "Mr. Lawson," she said smoothly. "We're conducting a preliminary assessment today. Just some routine documentation before we begin the transition. Now, would you like to start discussing relocation options?" I had never wanted to hit someone so badly in my life. I took a deep breath, forcing my voice to stay calm. "You need to leave. All of you." Karen sighed dramatically, like I was a child throwing a tantrum. "Jack, we've already had this discussion. You were officially notified. Legal action is already in motion, and fighting back will only delay the inevitable." She gestured toward the clipboard-wielding man. "Let's get started, shall we?" That was it. That was the moment I snapped. I pulled out my phone and dialed the sheriff's office right in front of them. Karen's smug expression flickered just slightly, but she quickly masked it, tilting her head with amusement. "Do you really think the police are going to do anything?" she asked, laughing. "After all, we have the paperwork. The county's approval. And the weight of a legally recognized HOA behind us." I didn't take the bait. I told the dispatcher exactly what was happening, emphasizing that these people were on my land without my permission, that they were refusing to leave, and that they were actively trespassing. Karen's amusement faded slightly when I said that last part. Maybe she had expected me to roll over. Maybe she thought I wouldn't have the guts to push back. She was dead wrong. The dispatcher confirmed that a deputy was en route. I kept my eyes locked on Karen as I repeated the words loud enough for everyone to hear. The security guards hesitated. One of them glanced at Karen, looking unsure. Karen straightened her jacket and forced another smirk. "This won't end well for you," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. Then, without another word, she signaled to her men and walked back toward her SUV. They followed, though none of them looked quite as sure as they had a few minutes ago. I watched as the SUV disappeared down the road, dust swirling in its wake like a warning. My pulse was still racing. My fists clenched. My entire body tense. But I refused to let myself feel defeated. They thought they could intimidate me into giving up. They had no idea what they had just started. By the time the sheriff's cruiser rolled up my driveway, Karen and her goons were long gone, but the tension they left behind still lingered in the air. Deputy Tom Callahan stepped out, adjusting his belt as he scanned the property. He was a man who'd seen plenty of small-town disputes, but even he looked irritated when I handed him the eviction notice. He read through it carefully, then let out a slow breath, shaking his head. "I've seen a lot of crap in my time, but this is a new low," he muttered, folding the paper and tucking it into his pocket. "They filed this under community development? And you had no idea this was happening?" "Not until yesterday," I said, my voice sharp. "And this morning, they showed up with a fake security team, acting like they already own the place." Callahan exhaled through his nose, his jaw tightening. "Yeah, that tracks. HOAs like this? They move quiet, use legal loopholes, and assume people won't fight back. Most folks don't." He gave me a pointed look. "You will, though, won't you?" "Damn right, I will." He nodded. "Good. But listen, Jack, if they've gone this far already, they're not gonna stop. They'll play dirty. They'll try to bleed you dry with legal fees, fines, whatever they can think of. You need a lawyer, and you need to make noise. Loud noise. People need to see this for what it is, a land grab." I had been thinking the same thing. I wasn't just dealing with a nosy HOA, I was up against a calculated scam that had been pulled off before. The more I thought about it, the more I realized Karen wasn't just expecting me to fight, she was counting on me losing. She wanted to drown me in so much legal red tape that I'd have no choice but to give up. But she had underestimated just how far I was willing to go. I spent the next few hours gathering everything I had, property deeds, old survey maps, transaction records, anything that proved I owned this land outright. Then I did exactly what Callahan suggested. I went public. I contacted Melissa Carter, an investigative journalist from a local news station who had a history of exposing shady HOA dealings. When I told her what was happening, she didn't even hesitate. "Meet me at your property in 2 hours," she said. "And send me copies of everything. I'll start digging." By the time her news van pulled into my driveway, she already had notes, legal records, and a deep frown that told me she didn't like what she had found. She filmed an interview in front of my farmhouse, the land stretching out behind me as a perfect visual of what was at stake. I laid it all out, the fake petition, the harassment, the fraudulent HOA, the attempt to bulldoze my home before I even had a chance to fight. I told them how Karen had shown up like she was royalty, acting like my farm was already hers. How she had used threats, fake security, and even the sheriff's office to try and intimidate me. Melissa nodded, taking notes as she listened. "We'll run this tonight," she said. "And I'll be following up on this HOA's financial records. Something tells me Karen's not just stealing land, she's profiting off of it." I wasn't sure what I had expected, but when the story aired that evening, everything changed. The report didn't just cover my case, it exposed Karen's entire scam. Melissa had dug deeper, uncovering county records that showed this wasn't her first time doing this. Over the past 2 years, she had pulled the same stunt on at least 5 other properties, pushing out landowners under the guise of community improvements while flipping the land for massive profits. By the next morning, my phone was flooded with calls. Neighbors. Friends. Complete strangers. People who had been too scared to speak up. People who had lost land in similar HOA scams. People who were tired of being bullied. Karen had been relying on fear and silence to keep her power intact. But now? Now, everyone was watching. And that's when she retaliated. The next afternoon, Child Protective Services showed up at my door. A woman in a crisp blazer, holding a clipboard and looking far too apologetic for someone about to turn my life upside down. "We received an anonymous report about unsafe conditions on the property," she said. "We're required to investigate." I felt my stomach drop. My sister's 2 kids stayed with me on weekends, running through the fields, playing with Toby, learning how to take care of animals. And now, Karen had weaponized that against me. I stepped aside, jaw clenched, and let them do their inspection. They checked everything, the barn, the house, the kitchen. Nothing. When they were done, the woman sighed and closed her folder. "There's no issue here," she said. "But I have to be honest, Mr. Lawson, these kinds of reports can keep coming. If there are enough of them, it can create a legal case for child endangerment, even if it's unfounded." I nodded slowly. Karen wasn't just trying to take my land, she was trying to ruin me. By the time the CPS worker left, my lawyer, Ethan Price, had already called me. "She's getting desperate," he said. "That's a good thing. Means she's scared. But you need to hit back harder." I agreed. And that's when we found the smoking gun. Ethan had been digging into the HOA's records, and what he found made my blood run cold. Karen wasn't turning my land into a public park. She had already made a deal with a developer. She was selling my farm to a commercial real estate group, who planned to build a luxury resort on the property. The community green space was a lie. That night, Melissa ran a second report. This time, it wasn't just about me, it was about Karen's corruption, her shady land deals, and her financial ties to developers. The fallout was immediate. The HOA board started splintering. Some of her supporters backed away, suddenly not wanting to be part of her mess. The community turned against her. The county commissioner, now under public pressure, launched an official review of the HOA's legitimacy. But Karen? She wasn't done. 2 days later, at 3:17 a.m., my security cameras caught movement near the fence line. A dark figure, lurking. Watching. Then, another alert. Motion detected. Front porch. I grabbed my phone, my heart pounding as I pulled up the feed. And there she was. Karen. Standing just outside my door, staring directly into the camera. And then, she reached for the door handle. She wasn't just trying to take my land anymore. She was coming for me. The second I saw Karen's hand on my door handle, my blood ran cold. This wasn't just another intimidation tactic, she was testing me, seeing how far she could push. She knew the cameras were there. Knew I would see her. And yet, she didn't care. That smug expression was still plastered on her face, like she was daring me to stop her. My grip tightened around my phone as I dialed the sheriff's office, my voice low and steady despite the fury burning in my chest. I have an intruder on my property. She's trying to enter my home. The dispatcher asked for details, but I was already moving. I wasn't waiting. I flicked on the floodlights, bathing the entire front yard in an unforgiving glow. For the first time, Karen hesitated. The motion light caught her off guard, and for a brief second, I saw it, the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Then, just as quickly, she smoothed her expression and stepped back. Not in fear. Not in retreat. But in control. Like this was all part of her game. The camera feed showed more figures moving near the fence line, 3 of them, all dressed in dark clothing. They weren't moving like kids sneaking around for fun. They were organized. Purposeful. I kept my eyes on Karen as she turned away from the door, slipping whatever she had pulled from her pocket back inside her coat. She hadn't come alone. She had brought people with her. And that meant one thing, this was planned. A motion alert popped up on my phone, confirming my worst fear. Another figure was near my barn. They were trying to damage something. Maybe cut the fences again. Maybe worse. I moved fast, grabbing the Remington shotgun I kept inside my house. I didn't fire. Not yet. But the sound of me chambering around was loud enough to carry through the night. That got their attention. The 3 figures near the fence froze, and even Karen's composure slipped as she turned back toward me. "Try it," I said, my voice carrying through the open doorway. "Step onto my land again and see what happens." I could hear the distant whine of sirens in the background now, the sheriff's deputies were closing in fast. And this time, they weren't showing up just to take a report. Karen exhaled, slow and measured, before flashing me one last cold, knowing smile. Then she turned on her heel, walking away like she had all the time in the world. The figures at the fence scrambled. 2 of them disappeared into the woods, but the third, the one near the barn, wasn't fast enough. The moment the sheriff's cruisers pulled up, they tackled him to the ground. I watched as he fought, thrashing, cursing, trying to break free. The officers weren't having it. They hauled him up, ripped off his mask, and my stomach twisted. I recognized him. Ray Delgado. One of Karen's so-called security guys. The same man who had been on my property days ago, surveying my land like he already owned it. Karen had sent him to trespass, to vandalize, maybe even worse. One of the deputies approached, his expression grim. "You got lucky tonight, Jack. This could have gone sideways real fast." "I don't believe in luck," I muttered, still watching Karen's SUV disappear down the road. The deputy nodded, then gestured toward Ray. "You want to press charges?" I didn't hesitate. "Damn right, I do." They hauled Ray into the back of a squad car, but even as they did, Karen was nowhere to be found. She had slipped away, like a snake retreating back into the brush. But this time, she had left evidence behind. Ray's arrest opened the floodgates. The deputies found HOA documents on him, printed records with my name on them, proving he had been given specific orders. That was enough to link Karen directly to the break-in. By the next morning, the county sheriff's office had an official warrant out for her arrest. And by noon, she was in handcuffs. Melissa Carter's next news report aired that night, showing Karen being escorted out of her home, her face carefully blank as reporters shoved microphones in her direction. "Mrs. Reynolds, is it true you were caught trespassing on private property? Did you order your security team to break into Jack Lawson's land? What do you have to say about the fraud allegations?" She didn't answer. She just walked, straight-backed, into the waiting sheriff's cruiser. But the damage was done. The news exposed everything. Her fraudulent HOA, the illegal land grab, the bribery, the attempt to sell my farm to developers. The entire town saw her for what she really was, a con artist in a power suit. By the next morning, the county commissioner issued an emergency suspension of the HOA's authority. In other words, the HOA was dead. Every bogus fine, every eviction notice, every legal stunt they had tried to pull, all null and void. The county announced a full-scale investigation into Karen's past property acquisitions. And when other homeowners came forward with their own horror stories, it was only a matter of time before criminal charges piled up. Karen had built her entire career on manipulation, intimidation, and fraud. And now? It was all crumbling down around her. But it wasn't over yet. Because I had one last card to play. A final, undeniable piece of evidence that would ensure she would never do this again. And once I handed it over to the sheriff, it was game over for good. A month after Karen was hauled away in handcuffs, my land was finally mine again, legally, unquestionably, untouchable. The fraudulent HOA was dissolved, every false fine and eviction notice was wiped clean, and every person who had been bullied by Karen's scheme saw justice served. But her downfall wasn't just about me. The investigation into her past deals unearthed a web of corruption spanning years. Karen had been stealing land under the guise of community improvements and flipping it to developers for massive profits. When all was said and done, she was facing multiple felony charges: fraud, trespassing, conspiracy, bribery. She had played the system for too long, and now, the system had turned on her. The best part? Her own HOA board abandoned her. The same people who had once backed her unconditionally voted to remove her name from every official document, desperate to distance themselves from the sinking ship. Her supporters disappeared overnight, acting like they had never known her. When I asked my lawyer how long her sentence might be, he smirked and said, "Long enough for her to regret ever stepping onto your property." She lost everything. Her home was foreclosed. Her reputation was ruined. And the town she once controlled now treated her like a walking joke. As for me, for the first time in months, I felt true peace. No more HOA threats. No more fear of waking up to bulldozers at my doorstep. I could walk my land, work my fields, and know, without a doubt, that no one was ever taking it from me. People still reach out to me, telling me how my fight gave them the courage to stand up to their own HOA nightmares. Some share stories even worse than mine: homes taken, life savings drained, families forced out. It made me realize this wasn't just my battle. It was a war people have been fighting for years. So tell me, have you ever been targeted by an HOA or a power-hungry Karen? How far did they go? Share your story, let's see who had it worse.